Hello everyone, welcome here to my video today. First of all, I want to say thank you for being so patient. I have been in the middle of a huge move, and we moved into a beautiful new house, and we've been unpacking and figuring stuff out. So our mixed media moods got pushed a little bit back, and then also regular videos got pushed a little bit back, but I'm really excited to get going on those again. How beautiful is this mood board that Jen put together for us? All this mint, these mint pieces and inspiration with these kind of tufts and little areas of beautiful coordinating colors or contrasting colors in some instances. I started with a piece of Canson watercolor paper here, and I covered it with gesso, Liquitex gesso. Then I pulled out some vintage papers because I feel like those always kind of send me in the right area. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but I knew that I wanted to do a trio. I have been trying really hard to move from tags specifically to more like canvas and like altered art pieces, just something that's not necessarily a tag, because in all honesty, I feel like when I'm sharing tags or I have people looking at my tags for sale, I think they kind of go, oh, it's a tag, what would I do with a tag? So I've been trying to take some of my favorite techniques and then just apply them on a little piece of artwork that's the same idea, just not tag shaped. I have some golden matte medium in this little cup, and I added some water to it, and I took the vintage text that I had, and the smallest one was about 4 by 6 inches, so I cut the other two down. I have one that's a music note, I have one that's a book text, and then one that is from a London phone book. How cool is that? Yeah, my beautiful friend Krista from London brought me that, so I get to play with that kind of cool gray tone paper. So I cut all those papers down to size, and then that piece of watercolor paper that I gessoed before, I cut myself 3 backgrounds, and then I used the golden matte heavy gel medium, and I added a little bit of water to it to give it just a tiny bit better consistency, and then I collaged those papers down. I let everything dry completely so that I knew it was permanent, and then now I'm coming in with some of that white gesso again, and I'm rubbing it into some areas and kind of creating a little bit of a pushback, basically. I'm not covering the whole thing and white-outing it or whitewashing it, but I'm just pushing back some of the areas of text and kind of helping them blend more into the background so that it doesn't look like I have this huge text piece. I love text, but I like it to be a bit more subtle and not so in your face. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm just using my hands. Now, I get a lot of friends and a lot of students who don't like using their fingers, or they have like really beautiful manicures and they're afraid to mess them up. Get yourself some, I think it's liquid glove. And I'll put a link to that because I do use that occasionally, like basically when I remember to put it on. And it's kind of like a lotion. You put it on your hands and you rub it in, and then nothing sticks to your hands. And then when you're done, you can just rinse off and you're good to go. After everything was dry, then I pulled out some of my, I was going to say my favorite pieces, but really I kind of just pulled out some stuff that I wanted to work with. So Jen had mentioned she was kind of going for spring with this beautiful mood board, and there are some flowers and like a bike and some, just even the whole like kind of undertone of it was very spring-like. So I got out 2 pieces of chipboard. One of them, the thistles, has been around for quite a while, but then I got out our birds on a wire, which are brand new with one of my new paper collections. And then I got out this dandelion stamp that has an extra floating seed, and this is a Viva Las Vegas stamp that Susan Brown designed for us. And I love it, and I thought that it would be cool to add a recessed texture in contrast to the chipboard textures. So you probably just saw there, I trimmed up a bunch of the extra cushion that was around the edge. If I'm just stamping in general, then it doesn't really matter. But what I'm going to do next, the technique I'm going for, I really wanted that extra cushion and rubber away. So I am using now some Blick Art Materials modeling paste, and everyone has their own favorite, and I think I talk mine up all the time. This is my favorite, and the reason is because once it dries, it's very plaster-like, and it has a lot of texture, and it's kind of smooth and chalky and very cool. And I really like it. So it adds a really great texture, and it doesn't get too plasticky like some of those other modeling pastes tend to get. So I put this down really, really thick, and then I heated the top of it, only the top layer, so that it was still wet and squishy on the inside. And then I'm using this stamp to push into the modeling paste. So it's creating a recess, an indent into the modeling paste. How cool is that? And you can do this with all kinds of stamps. You know, you could do it with a background stamp, with a crackle stamp, a wood stamp, anything you like. I just decided to do a dandelion because I felt like it was very spring-like, and it went with this whole theme that I have going on. And then I'm going to heat that dry almost the rest of the way, but I will set that to the side so I can get to work on some other things. Now, this is still that heavy gel medium that I was working with before. What I'm doing now, so the utensil that I use to spread the plaster, and I will put a link for this too, it is a Princeton Catalyst mini blade. So it's super cool because it has a big wooden handle, and then it has a silicone top. So I use it to spread all kinds of mediums, and then when the medium's dry on the handle, I can just, on the silicone part, they just pop right off. So when that happened, I saved them. So it was the plastery sort of modeling paste, and then I just kept them on my workspace, and I just collaged them down to add some more texture into the background of this piece. How cool is that, right? So it's the same thing like if you hold paint chips or anything like that. Yep, just collage those into any background you have going on, and you have a ready color palette. How cool. I am using that same matte medium now, not matte medium, I'm sorry, it's gel. It's thick, so I use the matte gel to glue my chipboard pieces down. And I did trim off a couple edges of my birds there so that they fit a little bit better. And these thistles ended up being just the perfect size. I didn't have to do any trimming on those. I'm just going to push them right up against the bottom of the card. And I decided to move them to the left. In all honesty, when I first started working on this project, I should have moved them to the right. But I do something later that makes it okay that two of my pieces are on the left and one's in the middle. And you'll kind of see what I mean when I start working on composition. Now I got out these Prima and Finnabair art stones. There's a regular size and a miniature art stone. I just got these. I'll put some links in the bottom to where you might be able to get your own. You know, check it out. Check Finnabair store. Check Blitsy. I'll probably link to Amazon because that's easiest for me. But if you're picking up things elsewhere, you know, just check it out if they have them. Probably scrapbook.com. Somebody's gonna have them around. And so I'm putting those down with gel medium. I spread some gel medium around on the bulbs of the thistles, not the stems, and then I kind of sprinkled the miniature art stones on just like you would an embossing powder. And then I tapped off the excess. Now I'm not heating them yet because I have some of these bigger art stones, and they're not huge, but they're big enough where I can pick them up with my fingers. And I'm dipping them into gel medium and then plopping them right down on top of the miniature stones for texture. And it is so cool. It is so awesome. I did then heat it dry so I could keep working, and then I got out my spray gesso from Krylon, and a couple different companies make spray gesso. I like Krylon. I've been a big fan of Krylon ever since I was in college and I was doing product prototyping. They have their paints have a beautiful finish, and I just have a lot of confidence in their products. I've used them for a long time and I'm comfortable with them. Does that mean that's what you have to use? Absolutely not. Now, why did I use spray gesso when I already had out a big can of gesso? I don't know, because I haven't used it in a while and I wanted to play with it, and I was just talking to somebody about it the other day. It is also really great for coverage very quickly. And then so as I started to spray it down, I kind of realized that it was maybe too good of coverage, and it started to cover up some of my words. So it was totally fine just to get some quick, flat coverage. Oh, and the other thing, I'm sorry, I do remember another reason I pulled it out was because I have all that texture from those art stones, and a spray, because it has like the aerosol behind it, it really pushes the paint down into that texture. So that was cool. So it's more like a base coat. Of course, it's gesso, so it should be a base coat anyways. But it's more like a base coat that was prepping my thistles and all the texture I worked on those. So now for the last couple seconds I've been going, and really this is like minutes of work, but I've sped it up. So when I say the last couple seconds, it's more like the last probably 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But I am going back in with that liquid gesso from Liquitex, and I am gessoing almost everything except for the base card. But I'm just getting everything a nice, even white base so that I can then bring in that beautiful mint color that Jen has introduced us to. And it does take a couple layers because Unwild Studio chipboard is laser cut, and so it has an ashy edge. Sometimes when you're working with a wet paint, especially something like super bright like a white, it will pick up some of that ash and then it turns kind of dingy and it looks a little gray. If you like that, which on plenty of my projects I do, totally go for it and you can just move forward. But I decided to go back in. I knew I needed to work with that kind of really light mint color coming up, so I did a couple layers of the gesso to make sure I had a nice white base. And then two, when I'm working around the texture that I created with the art stones on the thistles, I'm trying not to overload with paint. So sometimes I'll dip into water to thin the gesso down just a little bit and to kind of seep into the crevices that are in the texture rather than to lay on top. Because if it just lays on top, then it kind of dismisses some of that awesome texture we've worked on building. So now you can see my cards, all three of them laid next to each other, through all the different things we've done, layering up and doing some kind of gesso and then some spray gesso and just different things, the modeling paste. They've really started to kind of come together as a cohesive unit rather than three separate vintage text cards. Now I'm trying to aim for that minty color that Jen has in our mood board. And I'm going back and forth between two paints. I have the Dina Wakley Media Turquoise, and I have the Martha Stewart Satin, I'll have to double check the name. I think it's like Snap Pea or something like that. Sweet Pea, maybe? I will double check. I'm probably way off on that. But it took me a couple tries, and it's okay if it takes you a couple tries to get a specific color because that's fun. It's fun to mix your own paint. You shouldn't be afraid of it. Do I think it's bad if you use paint straight out of the bottle? Not even close. I do it all the time, and we have lots of artists out there and lots of companies who are finding beautiful colors for us to use anyways. But I wanted to kind of see if I could hit this mint color very, very close. I was really drawn to it in that mood board. And two, it's awesome. It's totally awesome to mix your own paint. So I have now been adding this sort of mint color that I was able to achieve to my three cards in different ways. For the birds on a wire, I specifically used the paint around the birds and on top of the birds to kind of create like a foggy sort of feel. Then on the dandelion, I did more of a wash and I covered it all because as the paint seeps into the recesses of the dandelion, it pools and makes a very dark color. Excuse me. And then for the thistles, I kind of covered the entire thing and just slightly on the card. So it's kind of fun. And I'm just adding in this color as much as I can and really enjoying it. Then I got out some shading gray, golden, and it is, I always have to think about this, it is the high flow acrylics. So it's almost like an ink in a paint bottle, and I used this to add some shading to my pieces. And at first on the birds on a wire, I was only going to shade the bottom underneath, but then I play around with the thistles and I'm really liking how it all looks, and it starts to look kind of like grungy, and which I am a huge fan of, and it's the reason that I bought this paint. I actually am going to need to get it in a much larger bottle next time because I go through it fairly quickly. But what I'm doing is I'm using a smaller brush, and that's so that I'm not overloading with too much paint at one time. And I'm tracing the edges of the flowers or the birds, whichever part I'm working on. I'm tracing the edge just a few, maybe 2 or 3 inches at a time. And the reason is so that the paint stays plenty wet, and then I can dip my brush in water, I can come back to the wet paint, and then I can sort of draw it out in a gradient effect or like in a fade out effect. My biggest tip on that is to work in smaller areas, because if you trace the whole thing with the paint and then you dip in water and you go back to feather it out, that first area where your paint touched down is going to be dry. So just work in smaller areas. You don't have to cover the whole thing at one time, especially with this sort of a technique. There are techniques where covering the entire thing is important. But for now, on these little areas, just work in small areas at a time. After I played with that thistle, then I decided that I was going to go back in and do the same thing to the birds that I had done to the thistle. So I'm going to kind of highlight all the beautiful depth that I have going on by the addition of this chipboard. By shadowing, I'm adding in a totally fake, awesome shadow with this gray paint. And it does say shading on it, which I think sometimes maybe tells me I should shade with it, and I'm thankful for that. So it has kind of a bit of a transparency to it, more than some of the others. It's a really nice color. I love it. And it looks beautiful with the mint, too. It's really making that sort of green kind of pop out now. One other suggestion, and I think this probably goes with a lot of the things that we hear in our lives, less is more. So if you start with with less paint and then you can let that dry, you can always come back with a second coat if you want it to be darker. But if you start out very dark and then you're not that happy with it, once the paint dries, it's really hard to get up. So keep that in mind. Here now for the dandelion, I have kind of done the opposite, where on the two chipboard cards, I used the shading gray to highlight the thickness of the chipboard. On this one, I used that dark gray, similar to the way I did the mint, and I put it down in the recesses of the dandelion. It's very cool. I then got out my fan brush, and this brush is really great for what you call dry brushing, and that's where you put down a little, like a very minute amount of paint, and then you dip the edges of your brush into the paint, and then you kind of wipe off the excess on a scrap piece of paper. So then you have very almost dry paint on your brush, and you can use it to create this sort of like stippling effect. It's really great when you're doing watercolors, and like you can make grass with it and things like that, and other things too, like it's good for fur and stuff like that. For this application, I used it to highlight the textures of the birds and the texture that I achieved on the thistle. I had a little bit of gray paint left over, the golden high flow, so I decided to add some water and then do a couple small splatters around. I'm trying to kind of step back a little bit from the splatters because I know I do a lot of them, so I'm trying to relax on those a little bit. Then I went back to the mood board, and as I was kind of checking it out, I thought I needed one more color, some kind of contrast, and all of a sudden, in that door image that's on the mood board, there's like a little bit of rust at the bottom, and it totally clicked. I needed to add that rust color in. So I got out my quinacridone Nico Azo Gold Fluid Acrylic by Golden. I did a little bit of splattering at first, and I was liking that. And then I thought, what if I highlight one of these birds? So I highlighted the bird, and that was nice. And then I remembered when I was adding that gray, how kind of cool it looked that just the bottom panel of the birds was gray. So I decided to do that. Awesome. Like, holy crap, it's awesome. So I was totally pumped by this and the adding of that sort of rusty color, and it's really nice, and it's a beautiful contrast, and it really makes that mint stand out just that much more because they're so unalike. They're very complementary, super delicious. And if you look on your color wheel, blue and orange are opposites. Even though my mint is a little bit green, or is more green, it does have a blue tint to it from that turquoise that I mixed in from the Dina Wakley Media. So that's very cool. So the thing is, if they're wet and they mix, because they're complementary colors, they'll turn brown. But as long as they're dry and they're next to each other, then they are really beautiful. So after I had that bottom kind of third of the card gold, well, Nico Azo Gold, I decided I really needed to do something on the other two cards. So I'm going to play with some stripes here, some horizons. And I guess this one is not necessarily a horizon because it's more vertical, but I'm going to use my paintbrush and a little bit of that Nickel Azo Gold watered down, and I'm going to create a big, bold stinking stripe. And this was really exciting to me because as I added the Nickel Azo Gold, the recess of that one dandelion seed in the middle of the stripe, the Nickel Azo Gold kept avoiding it because it was so deep. I kind of just ran across it. So now I have this really stark mint green right in the middle of that Nickel Azo Gold stripe, and it is delicious. And I've been on a stripe kick lately, whether it's black and white stripes or big bold orange stripes, which we're getting right now. So I decided to add some in. And this is where I was talking earlier. When I was looking at the composition of my cards, the birds are all the way across the middle. The thistles are on the left, and the dandelion was on the left. If I had planned it a little bit better from the beginning, I would have put the thistles on the right or the dandelion on the right and then left the other one on the left. But because I decided to bring in this beautiful orange color, then I was able to mimic that balance in composition by putting the orange on the left with the thistle and then the orange on the right with the dandelion. So now my composition the whole way across reads a lot better. It has really nice contrast, and it takes your eye from the left through the middle all the way to the right. So keep things like that in mind, okay? Then I just did one more dose over that Nickel Azo Gold in the middle card, and we called it done. Thanks so much for joining me. Please check below